You're listening to Now I've Heard Everything, conversations with the icons of our time.
When we had the challenge from Kennedy to go to the moon, that goal was paramount to inspiring the people. It's too bad that we can't have something like that happen again because it's good for the country.
NASA pioneer Chris Kraft. Today on Now I've Heard Everything, I'm Bill Thompson. This weekend marks the 55th anniversary of the first human beings to set foot on the moon. The Apollo 11 mission put astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the surface of the moon, while the third man of the crew, Michael Collins, remained in the orbiting command module. It was the fulfillment of an ambitious goal set early in the decade by President John F. Kennedy.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
During the 1960s, tens of thousands of talented scientists and engineers and experts worked tirelessly at warp speed, if you will, to help the U.S. reach that ambitious goal. At the heart of the effort was a brilliant aerospace scientist named Christopher Columbus Kraft Jr. Now, Chris Kraft invented or created or pioneered pretty much everything that we now know as modern-day mission control. From Mercury to Gemini to Apollo, Chris Kraft was right there helping shape the entire U.S. space program. In 2001, Chris Kraft wrote a memoir of his life and career, which also mirrored the growth of NASA during the 1960s. His book was called Flight, and that's when I had the chance to spend a few minutes with this iconic figure. So here now from 2001, Chris Kraft.
I have long wanted to write the stories that were in my head that I thought told the program from a different point of view than an astronaut, that told the story of a lot of the great people that never really got the credit for what they did, and how we managed the program. Some of the problems that we were faced with in dealing with the outside world and dealing with the inside world, dealing with the astronauts themselves, and what it took to make the space program really work.
It's almost like producing a movie. The public only sees the 3 or 4 stars on the screen, but there's hundreds of people behind the scenes who have made it possible for those people to be stars.
Yes, and in this case, it was literally thousands of people across the country that had a part to play in the manned space program.
And very serious roles. And we're not talking about something as frivolous as a movie. You're talking about the lives of people in this case.
Yes, very much so. And I think that was important because the country did feel a kinsmanship with the flight programs that we were conducting. And they realized that any small piece that they built or any small part that they played had something to do with the lives of the astronauts. That made it a lot easier to work with. It was a great feeling to have those people feel the way they did.
But, it strikes me as we sit here now in 2001 and space travel is so casual we hardly even notice when a shuttle is launched anymore.
Yes.
Unless something goes wrong. It's hard for us to recall, and it's valuable for you to remind us that it wasn't always that way, that it wasn't nearly as casual as we think it is.
No, indeed it wasn't. As a matter of fact, it was very nervous times every time we launched one of our astronauts into space back in the 60s and the 70s. It's sometimes frightening to me to think about that I was in the middle of that and wonder how I did it at the time and wonder how fast we did it. We did so many flights. As in Gemini, we were doing a flight every 2 months, and I look back on that and said, no, we couldn't have done that.
But, as you said in the book, you and your colleagues would ask yourselves, can we really do all this? And somebody would say, we have to.
That's correct.
You had to do it.
Yes, and that was part of the driving force, was the goals that we had set for ourselves in all of the programs, and particularly then when we had the challenge from Kennedy to go to the moon. That goal was paramount to inspiring the people, inspiring the supporters, inspiring the Congress It's too bad that we can't have something like that happen again, because it's good for the country.
But it was such a tangible goal. It was something around which the entire country could get its hands and say, yes, in 10 years we're going to be on the moon.
Yes.
What a great goal.
Yes, it was a great goal, and it only happens probably once in a lifetime, maybe once in several lifetimes, that you have the conjunction of the right elements of politics, of science and engineering to come together to accomplish a common goal, and that was a wonderful thing.
Well, as you said in the book, hundreds of years from now, historians will look back on this time period and realize that the years 1958 to 1972 was an epical period in our history.
I think so, particularly in science and engineering.
Do you remember where you were when you first heard about Sputnik, or when you first looked up and saw Sputnik?
Yes, I do. I was. I remember more when ours failed in response to it, but yes, I do remember that, and it was a shocking time. I remember a cartoon, as I poured out in the book, that where I lived, they had this scientist coming up out of a manhole where the cover had been thrown off, and he had on the ladder, and he had a big footprint in his fanny, and it said, "Where the hell have you been?" And that was probably very true in terms of the response that the country had. They were frightened to death of what that Sputnik could do, and they were wondering what we would do in response to it.
And it was by no means certain at that point that there was anything we could do that was as advanced as, the Russians must be years ahead of us.
Yes, that's true. And it was a propaganda coup that the Russians themselves didn't realize that they had accomplished. They did in several days when the world went bananas and said, what is this thing doing that's flying over us? And what does that mean that the Russians have that we don't?
But suddenly there was that urgency that you had to do it, and had to do it quickly.
It certainly did, and it drove the Congress, it drove the President, Mr. Eisenhower at the time, and the Congress was being beat upon by the press, particularly about what they were going to do to respond to the Russian challenge.
But the thing is, your book conveys the drama of not only having a challenge, not only having a deadline, you're going to need to catch up with something, but again, coming back to what we said a moment ago, you're dealing with human lives. You're talking about putting a human being on top of a controlled explosion.
Yes, and that's a great way to put it, too, because if you see all that fire and smoke coming out of the back end of a rocket, that makes you say, that's the problem. And if you don't recognize that, you don't understand the problem. And that is truly, as we said before, also that it drove the people's desire to make it right and do it right.
And all the things that, again, we take for granted today. How are we going to keep track of him when he's up there? How are we going to figure out where he is? How are we going to keep in touch with him?
Yes.
How do we know what his heart rate is?
Isn't that marvelous, that we could ask that for the first time and have to respond to it, not only in planning but in making the equipment and the hardware and the places around the world where that would take place. That was a real challenge to build that worldwide network.
Well, of course, anyone like yourself who's in on the ground floor of an enterprise like this, you have the opportunity to set the tone and to set the template, as it were, for everything that follows. I mean, you are basically the father of every mission control apparatus that has followed.
Well, I get the credit for it anyway. I had a lot of great people working for me, and they were wonderful people, wonderful guys, not only from this country, but a number from England that I have fond memories of. They came down from Canada, 25 of those guys. So we had an international team, really, eventually, that helped us get the job done. Australians, Africans, New Zealanders, and on and on. They were everywhere, and Hawaiians. It was just great to have all those people involved and have them going towards what we were trying to do. And they were great, very supportive of us.
Now, you describe in your book the explosion of media attention when the original 7 astronauts, or the Right Stuff astronauts, were introduced. Was there any friction going on between the stars and the crew?
I don't think so. I think initially maybe we were concerned that the public was overwhelming us, but beyond that, I don't think we had any friction. I don't think we had any idea that it was going to create that kind of situation in the country. And they were instant heroes and instant attraction to the press. And everybody in this country, and in fact everybody in the world, wanted to interview them. And if they couldn't get them, then they wanted to interview us. So it was a strange time for an aeronautical research engineer like myself. It didn't take us long, though, to get initiated into the world of the media.
Now, what does it feel like when the boy from Phoebus gets his picture on the cover of Time magazine?
I didn't believe it. I still don't believe it. But, I was really, again, I represented the engineering team that was doing flight control, and we had such great times together. They were happy that one of us made it that big.
Well, again, coming back to, you helped invent things that we didn't even know what to call the person on top of the control. It was the man in the capsule until
Yes.
somebody decided on astronaut.
Yes, that's very true. Unfortunately, the Russians chose cosmonaut and we chose astronaut, so we had a real difference. At least legibly, we had one that way. And that was the great thing about it. Every day was a new job. Every day was a new challenge. Every day we had to invent something that was different than we had done before, and just had a wonderful association, not only with the people inside the program, but the man in the street. To go speak to the Chamber of Commerce, to go speak to the kids around the country and the universities and so forth. That was a pretty good feeling to realize that you were at the top of that, and they were envious of the job you had, and frankly, they were right, because we did have a great job.
Now, you were working at that point, 70, 80 hours a week, and it doesn't sound like you minded.
No, it was too much fun. There aren't many times in your life, I suppose, or many people's lives that get to do what they want to do all the time. And so it was not a job. It was a passion, so to speak. And that was the other wonderful thing about it, where the people inside the program realized that what they were doing was important. They realized that what they were doing were making history. And so it wasn't just that we were suddenly going to wake up to the fact, oh my goodness, we sent men to the moon. We knew we had the best job in the country at that time.
Now, having said all that, though, that doesn't mean that everybody was in perfect harmony with everybody else on every issue on every day.
Oh, of course not. I mean, that would never happen in any human endeavor. But I think that was also apparent, that people were willing to give up their egos, willing to give up their own idiosyncrasies to make it happen. They argued like the devil, and we had many fights and many battles, but we walked out of the room with a common goal. And that really was a difference than anything I'd ever been associated with. It gave you a good feeling at the end of every day that we were all trying to do the same thing, even though we might not think that what the other guy was trying to do was correct. And so it brought out the best in everybody, and I think we achieved what 110% of anybody's mind could get. And putting that all together is what made the program successful, because it was hard to do. It was a difficult task. Had many dangers associated with it, the safety aspects of it, making sure that you did it right, not wanting to see something fail, knowing that failure, though, would be the thing that you based the next day's success on. All those things were something that gives you great pride in.
But when you have a failure like the Apollo fire, I mean, you've got to learn from your mistakes, and what a tragedy it was. But what happened? What went wrong?
I think that we got too far in front of ourselves there. I think that we were trying to run too fast. We were trying to make the goal of landing men on the moon in the 60s, and we had not taken enough time to make the lessons learned from the previous programs that we had done and integrated those modifications into the spacecraft as we went. So we had some design problems. We had some problems where people overlooked some problems that were developing, and we got into this condition on the launch pad that was extremely dangerous and had become a little complacent, I think, about the intimacies of that particular 100% oxygen at 15 pounds per square inch.
But that really sobered you up afterwards.
You bet.
The whole organization. I mean, you
Yes.
were very focused after that.
Yes, we were. And as I said in the book, I don't think we could have gotten to the moon had we not had that calamity take place. That's a terrible thing to say, but I think it is true, because people's desires, their their emotions, and their motivation was highly trained and placed in the middle of that. And it was those were tough times, I have to say. But we had resolve, and it brought us to the point of taking advantage then of what happened there and making it better as fast as we could. And without that, I don't think we would have gotten to the moon in the 60s, because it gave us a chance to fix things that needed to be fixing.
But also, it sounds like with almost every mission that you were connected with, in some way, either large or small, something went not according to plan, and you had to figure out some way. I mean, we looked at Apollo 13,
Yes.
was a grave example of that. But there were all these missions where something was, maybe it was some little thing, maybe it was some big thing, but you had to kind of fly by the seat of your pants and find a way around it.
Yes, and that sounds daunting, but most of us were exhilarated by that challenge. We ran so many simulations of things that could go wrong, and so we're kind of used to that challenge. Every time we ran a test of ourselves, and so we were prepared to think that way. And particularly with the mission rules we wrote and said, if this happens, we're going to do this. If this happens, we're going to do this, and on. And you could have multiple failures. So we were readily prepared, just as any good sports team is prepared, to handle things that were out of the ordinary. Now, we weren't prepared for killing somebody, but we were certainly prepared for malfunctions that could occur. And, it's a very different thing that people can think about there. When you got something on the runway, or you have something on the launch pad, and something breaks, you go fix it, or you change it out and put a new piece of hardware in there. But when you're flying, the first thing, you can't do that. You can't change the hardware. You can now maybe in the space station, but we couldn't do that back then when we were on the way to the moon. So if something happened, we tried to figure out ways to work around those problems, use what we had, and still get the mission done. And that happened to us almost, as you pointed out, it happened almost every time we flew.
And you learned something every time.
Indeed we did, and it made it such an exhilarating job to carry out.
And that's why today it seems so routine, because you've got all these missions that you've learned from over the years.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that we now know how to live and work in zero gravity in a perfect vacuum. So we know the basic and fundamental design parameters that have to be met, and you don't fly until they are met. Just dust particles floating around inside a transistor doesn't sound like that's important, but when it gets between the points in the transistor and they fail, then you understand that that's a zero-G problem.
Now, I'm back in May of 1961. We're almost 40 years ago now from Alan Shepard's first flight. On that day, if you could have looked ahead 40 years, did you figure that we would look like we look like now, or did you have higher hopes for us?
Well, I think I have to admit that in 1961, I certainly wasn't thinking about going to the moon. So at that particular point in time, I think that I would have been surprised had we been to the moon by this time period. I have to say that honestly. But having gone to the moon, having accomplished a tremendous goal, having done something that man was trying to do for 10,000 years, it is hard to understand why the country doesn't want to continue space exploration, because there still is a lot to be done, still a lot of benefits to be gained from just making the investment, because the changes in the state of the art of technology is greatly affected by those kinds of investments. It used to be a war that brought about big changes in technology. Now I think it takes some other challenge, whether it be in medicine, whether it be in engineering, or whether it be in science, or whether it be in spaceflight that combines many of those. It's those big demands which cause the big changes in technology and which cause great advancement in the state of the art. And I'm hopeful that the country will come to that again, maybe in my lifetime, where they decide that, well, we're going to go back to the moon, we're going to take on the challenge of going to Mars, but we'll do it because it's not only inspirational, it's not only good science, it's not only a good thing for the country to do, which shows the rest of the world that we have this great country, but it does give us an investment in changing technology, and it's just like investing in the stock market in my mind.
I wanted to ask you, out of all the things that the great souvenirs, the great mementos that you've accumulated from your space career, are any of those as important to you as your Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig baseball?
No, I don't think they are. I was a heck of a fan of Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, and I still have that baseball with both those names on it. But I do have a lot of great space mementos. Many of the astronauts have given me, and many of my own remembrances of things that happened to me, such as receiving the medal for leadership from President Kennedy. So I have many great memories of both my young age and my space age.
But boy, to be down there and stand there and ask Babe Ruth and ask Lou Gehrig for their autographs and have them personally say, while you're watching, I can't even imagine what a thrill
I ran out and got that from Lou Gehrig. The people in the stands thought I'd gone bananas, but he did it, and I thought that was a great experience.
Chris Kraft died in 2019, just a few days after the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. He was 95. Now you can get your copy of Flight by Chris Kraft by tapping the link in our show notes or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is where you can also hear my 2000 interview with astronaut Buzz Aldrin.
There were times when I wasn't that sure what great heroes we were. Right after we came back from the moon, there were demonstrations going, anti-establishment demonstrations, and they threw eggs at us. Can you believe that?
And my 1990 conversation with Michael Collins.
What Kennedy said in 1961 was crystal clear. He said to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth by the end of the decade. Whether that was good or bad, it was certainly clear.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you listen to podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, he went from being a self-described slacker to an internet publisher. My 2011 interview with Andrew Breitbart.
Before the internet, I was a slacker in my early 20s, having graduated college. I resembled the movies. I resembled the articles about Generation X and what are we going to do? And then the internet happened.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.